Hello, welcome to the third session on territory, urbanism beyond techno-fix. I'm happy to introduce, after Theo Deutinger and Iris van der Toen and Nana Verhoef, Ola Söderström. Ola is a professor of social and cultural geography at the Institute of Geography of the University of Neuchâtel. He's published extensively on urban material culture, visual thinking and urban planning, urban policy mobility, urban living and psychosis. His present work has two foci: the provincialization of smart city narratives in India and South Africa, which is part of the talk that he will give today, and the relation between urban living and psychosis. His most recent monograph is Cities in Relations, Trajectories of Urban Development in Hanoi and Ouagadougou. He's also a member of the presiding board of the Swiss National Science Foundation, SNSF, and the president of the SNSF Social Science and Humanities Division. Joining the conversation after his talk, we are honored to welcome Daniella Zetti, who is a postdoctoral researcher at the chair of the history of technology at ETH. Her research focuses on the administration of digital societies as part of the SNSF project Digital Federalism. Daniella was a fellow of the DFG research group Media Cultures of Computer Simulation at the University of Lüneburg, and she's also the co-editor of the series History of the Digital Age. We're also happy to have Jörg Stollman join this conversation. Jörg is a professor of urbanism at the TU Berlin. He's an architect and urban researcher. He's also the co-founder of Urban Inform. He graduated from the University of the Arts in Berlin and Princeton University, and taught at the University of the Arts Berlin and ETH Zurich, where he was director of studies of the MIS in urban design. And he also curated parts of the International Architecture Biennale of Rotterdam on the section Squat, the Informal City Under Construction, and also organized and curated the symposium Beware of Smart People, Redefining the Smart City Paradigm Toward Inclusive Urbanism. Finally, joining as well the discussion, we have Evan Blake, who is a PhD candidate at the University of Neuchâtel with the Institute of Geography. His background as an urban ethnographer in Cape Town has covered the memory politics of drinking, the right to the city through the lens of homelessness, and the digital democratization of markets research. His doctoral research with Ola Söderström focuses on the production of data power and knowledge politics in South Africa from the position of grassroots-oriented civic organization, and part of this is in Ola's talk. The conversation will be moderated by Professor Milica Topalovic and myself, and will be happening on Zoom on Monday, the 13th of March at 5 o'clock. And we'll be also welcoming your questions. So enjoy Ola's talk, and we'll see you afterwards.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for watching this talk, despite the worries and disruptions caused by the epidemic. As you know, this talk is in a series of presentations and talks about the technological fix, and it's entitled Beyond the Technological Fix. And my talk will be on smart cities. You are probably aware that there is actually a strong link between smart cities and public health responses to the virus, especially in Asian countries. You've seen probably that South Korea has been using a series of typically smart city technologies, so connecting big data from mobile phone and their GPS functions to track the mobility of persons, combined with CCTV images and cameras. There are millions of them scattered around the country in South Korea, the uses of credit cards. So the combination of these data have allowed the authorities to follow patients and to map the diffusion and to mitigate the diffusion of the virus. I won't go into detail in these questions, but we might discuss these aspects in our discussion when we meet on the 30th. So now we'll switch to the PowerPoint presentation, and I will be shrinking and moving up, as you see now, to the right-hand side of your screen. This talk is entitled Politics of the Technological Fix in South African and Indian Urbanism. I will explain during my talk what I mean by the politics of the technological fix, which is central to my arguments today. This talk draws on previous work that I've done with colleagues on smart cities, and it more precisely draws on an ongoing research which is, as you see here, is funded by the Swiss National Science Foundation, which has an international co-investigator scheme allowing applicants in Switzerland to work with applicants abroad, and in this case in the UK. So the team is co-led by Iona Datta from University College London and by myself, and has a pretty large team of researchers in South Africa: Nancy Odendaal from the University of Cape Town, Evan Blake, who is South African and works with me for his PhD, which is in this project. In India, Diganta Das, among others, who is from the Nanyang University of Singapore, and a series of researchers based in the different cities where we work. And we have, as you see, an advisory board with very interesting colleagues with whom we discuss our results. So the outline of this talk, I will walk you through 4 different steps. I will start by discussing what we mean by technological fix, and especially how it relates to smart city studies. Then I will show how this specific form of technological fix, which is the smart city narrative and model, is rolled out and taken up in South Africa. Then I'll move to the question of the politics of the technological fix through a series of examples in India and South Africa. And surprisingly, I will conclude by a conclusion. So first of all, what do we talk about when we talk about the technological fix? The term itself was coined by a US physicist. You might have heard this before in this series, called Alan Weinberg, and he did it in a book that he published in 1966. And Weinberg actually used it not in the critical way we often use it today, but in a very positive way, in a very triumphant modernist way, quite typical of the early 1960s. And Weinberg's idea was that technology would soon solve all social problems, and that engineers, a caste to which he belonged, would in the future replace social scientists, policymakers, and religious leaders. Weinberg, of course, simply gave a catchy and therefore successful name, this is why we still use it, to a quite long-standing idea. And I think that this idea is well captured by the graphic you see here. It's a graphic from the 1930s, which was widely used by believers in technological solutionism. And in this picture, as you see, we can see how wise engineering is able to be much stronger and more efficient than social measures and politics in solving a risky mobility situations where you have people falling out of the streetcar, and a financial decree and a political edict does not solve the problem until engineers redesign the cars remove the platforms and provide folding steps and provide a technological solution which works automatically, says the graphic. So as you are aware, because we're here today in 2020, social scientists, politicians, and so on are still of this world. So Weinberg's predictions were not totally accurate. But of course, the narrative of the technological fix, the idea, persists very much today. We can see it, for instance, in the climate change debate with the attractiveness for some of geoengineering solutions, sending up sulfur in the clouds to mitigate the greenhouse effect. We see it also in the way parties position themselves toward this problem of climate change or climate warming in Switzerland. The solution for the Green parties is basically social engineering, changing ways of life, whereas the Liberal Radical Party in Switzerland promotes much more a solution to the crisis through technology. So this idea has, of course, been the subject of a critique, which is also long-standing. Technological solutionism, it has been argued, and I just rehearse a few of these arguments, is basically functional to the economic interests of the technological industry. It tends to depoliticize social problems that are inherently political, and it tends to reduce complex social problems, which was actually what Weinberg's idea, to reduce complex social problems to technological solutions and therefore address only part of the problem in the real world. Now, so this is the kind of general, summarize very quickly the general debate around technological fix. Now, smart city studies have staged the same debate, and it's corporate IBM, Siemens, or Cisco form, you know, that these companies are the major players in smart technologies for cities. Smart cities present themselves as technological fixes. Here, what you have here is one of those before and after slides that IBM was using a few years ago on its smart cities campaign. And you can see how this queue, this archaic social practice that the queue is, will, thanks to technology, according to IBM, soon belong to history. So typically, this kind of move from a social problem to a technological solution. We can find the same Alan Weinberg ethos in Seattle today, for instance, where tech companies involved in a municipal innovation advisory council, which was recently set up in 2018. This advisory council promises to solve Seattle's social problems, such as homelessness, through technological solutions. And here you have the page about the homelessness data model on their website. So this ethos of the technological fix in smart city narratives is what scholars in smart city studies have been criticizing in early work on smart cities. People like Dave Hollands, Rob Kitchen, Sarah Bell, and myself have been airing this critique. Sarah Bell, for instance, argues that the smart city narrative is a vision of cities that frames all urban questions as essentially engineering problems to be analyzed and solved using empirical, preferably quantitative methods. In a paper on IBM's smart city strategy, I argued with colleagues that at its core, this is what structures IBM's smartest city discourse, an engineering epistemology applied to humans and non-humans, nature and culture reunited by the engineering mind. Now, these critical arguments that came out a few years ago, I think were very much the ones developed in what I see as the second wave of smart city scholarship. So if you look at smart city scholarship starting in the early 2000s, I think we've gone through 3 waves. The first one was very much aiming to develop smart technologies for cities, so very much a utilitarian body of scholarship. The second one is the one I just referred to, which was looking at the opportunities, but also mainly at the risks of the smart city model, deconstructing its discourse and ideology. And then the third wave is a critique of the critique, if you like, saying we need to look at material interventions, policies and collective action. And the motto here is we need to look at the actually existing smart city. I think the arguments in this third wave are correct. We need to move from discursive analysis to looking at cities on the ground. This has been happening now for a few years. At the same time, I would argue that it needs to be connected with discursive analysis, because smart cities is very much a discursive phenomenon. It is central to the smart city phenomenon. And I am having a quote here by Jos et al. Saying where they argue that discourse, and they're talking about the smart city, discourse shapes concepts and programs and is a key means by which ideas and practices are borrowed, transmitted, and reproduced within different geographical, cultural, and institutional settings. So in my view, what we need to do is articulate discourse and interventions, look at the interplay of those phenomena, because discourses are, of course, performative, they act. So having said this, let me now focus on 2 aspects of smart cities in India and South Africa. And first, how it was rolled out and taken up on a national level. And then we'll look at technology-fix on the ground. This is how we frame the analysis of the rollout and take-up. I'm not going into the details here. We can discuss this if you like, but very quickly said, what we try to do is I think it's useful to look at this phenomenon, how the smart city idea imposes itself as a development strategy as an urban policy mobility. So how it comes from the exterior in many ways. But we also need to look at it as a form of take-up. And here it's, I think, useful to use the cosmopolitization framework developed by Ulrich Beck, also by Anders Block in the context of urban policies recently, because smart cities is not just a mobile urban policy. It's something that comes from within, a sort of globalization from within, which is how Beck frames or defines cosmopolitization. So now, if we look at what's been happening in South Africa, I will focus on that example for the sake of time, but also because it's simpler than the Indian phenomenon, which is very much shaped by the governmental policy, which I'll describe later, the smart city mission. So what we did here is that we looked at media releases. We used the LexisNexis database, so press releases, but we looked at also at a series of other sources to understand how this was rolled out and taken up in South Africa from 2005 to 2008 onwards. The first thing I want to show you is the lexical change. So how IT-driven urban development strategies has been progressively framed and has been is described as a smart city strategy. So if you look here and you can focus first on the right-hand side, the bottom right, where you have the whole country, you can see that in 2008, the media was very much talking about the digital city when they were talking about IT-driven policies. Then when we switch now to the next phases in our analysis, you can see, so 2009, 2013 first, and look at the bottom right. You can see how the red increases, so how progressively these policies are described as smart city policies. Let me get back now to focus on another process, which is how this is very much driven by the metropole. So these discourses are not happening in Buffalo City, for instance, in the beginning, but you can see them appearing in the Gauteng city region, so with Joburg at its center, in Cape Town, and in eThekwini, so Durban. So there's a kind of metropolitan drive in the process. The second thing that this analysis allowed us to show is which type of actors have been involved in these policies. So what we see here from 2005 to 2018 is the role in South Africa of the local government, which, as you see, is dominating in media reports, but also the private sector becoming more important. What is also interesting, and maybe the most interesting, is what you have on the bottom left. So the degree of code overlap, which means that this measures the amount of reports where these different actors are reported together around the same intervention. So this is something that we see. So different actors are related to the same intervention, local government, private sector, the corporate, etc. And we see actually the same thing when we look at another element of this analysis, when we looked here at the type of intervention. So you can't read it in the upper side, but you can read it on the lower side, on the right-hand side. You can see the interventions that are mentioned are mostly around infrastructures such as broadband, optic fiber networks. But also here you can see how interventions become more and more variegated through time, including ICT data capacity building, for instance. And the same thing you can see on the bottom left here, how in the reports it's increasingly about interventions that are addressing different types of aspects at the same time. Now, what we conclude from this is three things. Is that when we look at this rollout or the geohistory of smart cities, we see that it's uneven, that it's starting in the larger metropoles. We see that this generates an enmeshment of actors who become complicit in one another's production of smart, so actors working basically together. And finally, and this is about the fact that a whole series of interventions are called smart today. And so in many ways, smart cities act as a lexical glue. So it holds together otherwise disparate interventions and governance functions. And this is also a result from other studies, for instance, in the book Inside the Smart City, edited by Carvin and et al., showing that the smart city, because it brings money, because it's a trendy way of talking about urban policies, has become a kind of label that you stitch on very different forms of activities which previously were not defined as smart. Excuse me. So what this, let me stay on this first. What this analysis shows is, of course, quite superficial. It says a few things about the rollout, the kind of general picture. What we are interested in this research is to use this, and it's actually a very helpful backdrop for a more fine-grained study of smart cities on the ground. And we're doing this in 6 cities, 3 in South Africa, 3 in India. And we've chosen, I can discuss this on the 30th if you'd like, we've chosen these cities on the basis of most different cases, just trying to contrast quite different forms of smart city policies and interventions in both cities, and then comparing across these cities and across countries. So it is now third part of my intervention. I will develop 2 arguments. The first is that this technological fix narrative that which is central to the smart city and central to its rollout, to its attractiveness. We're going to solve urban problems and social problems in the city through IT technologies. This narrative is actually mobilized by all actors of urban development. As critical scholars who were tempted to think that this is a prerogative of private corporation, of state bodies, politicians, administration, but actually it makes also its way into the strategies of civil society organizations, and also in the ordinary discourse of citizens in cities. The second argument is, which I will develop, is that TECHNOFIX is relationally shaped by urban actors in their attempts to persuade and act. In other words, technological solutions are created in the interaction between actors of urban development. This is what I mean by the politics of the technological fix. This technological solutionism is very much part of an interest and power game between those different private, public, and civil society actors. So now, let me start on this point with an example from the Smart City mission in India. As you might be aware, in 2015, the Prime Minister who came to power at that time, Narendra Modi, launched his Smart City mission, which is essentially the rollout of a smart city policy across the subcontinent. And for that, he organized a competition, the Smart City mission, giving some governmental funding, very little has been spent actually, to 100 cities across the country. And now it's been recently extended to a few more. And what you have in this image is here is the iconic and nearly ubiquitous feature of the smart city, the control and command center. And we are here just a few weeks ago, actually, before the confinement. We are here in Varanasi with the researchers, and we are discussing the Yogesh Mishra here and myself were discussing with the IT specialist who works for a private company commissioned by the municipality to implement a smart waste management policy. And he explains to us here how everything is monitored from the control center. They monitor the level of dustbins through sensors. They monitor the routes of the trucks of the waste management squads. They monitor even the level of gas in these trucks. And they monitor the daily work. And this is what you have on the bottom left, the daily work of people responsible for cleanliness in the neighborhoods. So it's a very sophisticated surveillance and monitoring mechanisms where issues as cleanliness, but also questions of the use of illegal dump sites by these truck and their squads, the siphoning of gas in the trucks by truck drivers, all of this is addressed by a quite sophisticated technological fix. You also have another thing that we find in many Indian smart cities, which is a system of number plate recognition at the bottom right. And this is used to automatically scan with CCTV cameras number plates, and from the number plates to connect that to the data on the identity of the drivers or the owners of cars and motorcycles, and automatically send them fines. And you can imagine the number of fines per day in cities where, if you are strictly obedient and following the rule, following the law, it means basically that you're stuck in traffic jams the whole day, you don't move. So there's a lot to say about surveillance, formalization of activities, of practices in this example. What I want simply to do here for the moment is to point out here is the obvious coalition here between private companies and municipalities in smart city plans to implement those technological solutions. And this in many ways corresponds to the kind of technological push that has been criticized by many critical city scholars. So in other words, the idea that urban development priorities are shaped, priority here is traffic rules, for instance, rather than other problems, that those priorities are shaped by stateful actors and by the possibilities that are given by IT companies. So that's the kind of traditional narrative. And I would like to move beyond this and move to get to the title of the series, beyond the critique of the technological fix, and to broaden our scope and to look at how IT is mobilized by a range of different actors. And this, I want to do that to try to provide a more nuanced and complex idea of what is going on in actually existing smart cities. So to do that, let us move back to South Africa, and let us look at Cape Town. As we saw previously, when we saw the maps of the rollout, we could see that Cape Town was an early starter, and Cape Town started with a smart city strategy actually 20 years ago, and the slogan of the mayor at that time, Patricia de Lille, was that Cape Town was to become the first truly digital city in the whole continent, in the whole of Africa. And since then, there is a strong tech team in the municipality. And there's by now a long-standing practice of e-governance, actually e-government, more precisely, and actually a quite efficient policy. At the same time, there is in South Africa in general and in Cape Town in particular, a very active and strong tradition of corporate, civil society organizations. And this is a tradition and organization that in large part is inherited from the anti-apartheid era and movement. So you have in these NGOs many technologically savvy people using IT, producing data to achieve their aims. And it's very spectacular actually in Cape Town. So in other words, there's a strong movement of smart city from below in Cape Town. Or if we want to use Michael Peter Smith's argument, it's rather a smart city from below. So from urban social movements rather than directly from the citizens or from the state. So let me take two of these organizations that are quite contrasted in the use of and position towards technology. And here I'm very much drawing on the work of Evan Blake, who will be joining us for the discussion on the 30th. So what you have here is the first of the organizations I want to talk about. It's called Violence Prevention Through Urban Upgrading, so VPUU. And the VPUU was created in 2005. They intervene in the informal settlements and in the poor neighborhoods of Cape Town. And their activity is based on a key finding that it's basically they're anchored in urban design. And they start from a key finding, which is that crime is frequently associated with points of failing basic infrastructures. So the failure in terms of access to water, electricity, lighting, for instance, etc. So from that basic finding, their work follows two simple processes. The first is to identify these failures. This is what you see on the right-hand side, so high-risk areas, to map them. And second, they develop a participatory design process with the community, which is what you have on your left-hand side, where you have, if you can read it, what the community wants. For instance, to have a large indoor sport facility and opportunities for small business in the first image and example on the left-hand side. So the way they proceed is that they produce data through technologies such as IT networks. They have set up a local IT network and smartphones. And this is done by people from the community. Here you have people inspecting toilet blocks, and they have meetings where they learn how to use this local network. And there's also a local neighborhood center which acts as a community register. So where you will, where there's a mapping of who lives where, and which allows people to get in contact with the services of the municipality and get mail because they simply have an address. So this is the way they work, this type of the data is funneled into a community atlas where you have for Khayelitsha, which is the community and the area of Cape Town where they are most active, a very poor area of Cape Town. They have an atlas where you have all all these data collected in the same spot. So simply put, the aim of VPUU is to hold the state accountable through the production of evidence. What the data they produce say is, here is where infrastructure is lacking, here is where it is not maintained, and here's where the city needs to act. So here are two quotes from Evan Blake's fieldwork, where VPUU leaders affirm this centrality of data and technology in their work. And just to give you a break, I'll let you read them and I'll stay in silence for a few seconds. So two leaders of the organization, and what they're doing is that they use the language of the city of Cape Town, which constantly refers to evidence-based policies, data, etc. This is what I mean by a technological fix that is relationally elaborated. It's a language game that is developed between the city, which has been developing this for a while, and organizations who want to to speak on an equal level. And they do that because they want to enable right claims through these data. And so they use the same focus basically on data and technology, and they thematize issues where they think the municipality is not doing enough. Now, if you were there physically, you might ask me, does it work? Is this TECHNOFIX strategy from the bottom up fruitful? And this is what other civil society organizations in Cape Town are doubtful about. And this is why there is, in my view, contested politics of the technological fix in Cape Town. So let me explain this by using the work of another organization called the Development Action Group, DAG. You have the logo on the left-hand side, and they work closely with another organization called PlanAct. As you can see here, these are organizations which have a longer trajectory. They were created in the apartheid era, and what the activities focusing on for DAG especially is to produce housing for the poor in innovative ways. So meaning they develop solutions, housing solutions beyond the type of processes developed by the municipality or by the national government or by the markets or by the private sector. They are not technophobic. They also used participatory mapping using GIS to map access to infrastructure and housing conditions. Actually, one of my other PhD students has been working on participatory mapping with DAG, but they are much more skeptical regarding the role and power of technology in their activity. And here you have two quotes, a bit longer, of the CEO of DAG and the managing director of PlanAct. The CEO of DAG saying, "I'll be honest with you, the data is complete bullshit. I doubt the veracity of the data. Sure, it was collected in a particular way with rigorous methods. I don't doubt this. But the issue he has is who is it for, basically? It's not only about how it's collected, where it is done, but who is it for? Is it for us as organizations? Or is it for the community? How is the community benefiting from what has been gathered?" The managing director of PlanAct says basically the same thing, saying my opinion is that before we speak about technology, we need to get basics right. And these basics are not the smartest. These are basics of participatory democracy. So it's about these soft skills, about dealing with humans, about getting both sides to see each other as the very first step. So, and as you can see here from this image of members of DAG and PlanAct in the fields, they're not using smartphones, they're using just pen and paper, and they focus on these soft infrastructures that the PlanAct CEO mentioned. So liaising with people, constantly communicating with members of the community and building with them an understanding of the living conditions and how to improve it. Here you see another image of these activities where you have people trained to work and to document their community in Khayelitsha. So, in other words, to summarize this contrast between these two organizations, VPUU is very much driven by a traditional cartographic ethos. They have I would say, an extractivist stance in terms of data, and believe that the language of data and technology is what will empower the rights claims of the community. In contrast, for Dag and Planak, technology and data tend to become ends in themselves. They tend to become distractions from their main objective, which is for them finding solutions with the community. So to wrap up what I've been saying and to conclude my talk, let me insist on 3 points. I have been arguing that smart cities, digital cities, and whatever technology and data-driven urban development strategies are going to be called in the future. Smart will be called something else. In a few years, it's starting to be called something else now. They are, to a large extent, these strategies, instantiations of the recurring idea of a technological fix. This very much naive idea needs to be constantly criticized in its reiterations, and as it depoliticizes urban development strategies and tends to favor private interests rather than the public good. However, this critique should not obscure how technology and data enable rights claims for the poor and allow communities to hold the state accountable for the situation on the ground. And to do justice to these processes, beyond a simple critique of the tech fix, we need to study the contested politics of the technological fix and how these solutions at the same time can be vectors of empowerment and can also be vectors of disconnection from the problems and perspectives of people on the ground. So I could continue on this, but I will stop here so we can discuss these arguments when we virtually meet on the 30th. So see you soon, and in the meantime, stay safe and take care.
I think it's very iconic, and it's on the one hand, it's the technology that can fix something, and on the other hand, it's on another level, it's technology fixed, because that in the engineer's mindset, you could say that that streetcar was imperfect before, so then you fix it, and then it's perfect again. So that, I think, opens up very interesting questions on what happens in a bigger social technical system when you fix technology. So this might apply to the question of a designer that redesigns his desk, and I think it's important to look at those things, because they open up important issues like who is discriminated if you have another kind of streetcar, or who has problems with Zoom, which were not anticipated before. So as a historian of technology, my intervention would be really to look at the technology itself, and then think about the system, and then come back to the technology again. So those self-reflections of engineers, I think they are important. Yeah.
It's completely counter intuitive to the very, let's say, the very education of engineers is very much, in fact, not to doubt oneself. That's completely, I mean, if you think about the kind of traditional education systems, for instance, I'm thinking about the French education systems in terms of grandes écoles, and for instance, Polytechnique, and let's say l'École des Mines, and all these grandes écoles, they are actually designed to produce engineers without doubtless engineers, people who are in fact never doubting. So I think that's actually not so easy to find what you're talking about, like people designing systems able to actually self-reflect on those systems is actually something which I think in fact, that whole series that we put together is also trying to tackle. We also invited a lot of people from technologies precisely because of that. And we had interesting conversations where at times it's not evident why we're actually putting these questions together. So maybe even you can tell us a little bit more also about how your so it's our understanding that parts of Ola's talk is also drawing upon your own research in a context of South Africa, correct?
Yes, correct.
And maybe it would be great to also hear from you and your take on perhaps the saliency of your research at times of crisis as well. I mean, not your research, but let's say how the systems that you've been investigating of, let's say, self-managed technologies in urban environment, in informal urban environment as well, have, let's say, emerge, or how they react. I don't know. I just want to, yeah, Milica, you want to add something? Maybe one.
Yeah, just
yes.
to add an additional question, essentially, why? Perhaps I'm curious after looking at the talk, and maybe I would be interested to discuss a little bit further. Why is this smart city narrative so well suited or so powerful in the context of South Africa? No, I mean, Ola was talking about this kind of emerging of these enmeshment of actors that surprisingly even the kind of civil society organizations, NGOs are part of that approach.
Yeah.
And I think it's fascinating to see that power of that techno-fix politics in that context, I mean, I would also ask Ola, perhaps, is this narrative, to say so, more powerful or more successful precisely in the context of the, I would say, countries which are currently urbanizing, and what is the difference in the way that smart city is unpacked, for instance, in Switzerland or in other European situation, right? Because we are looking at the kind of political strategies. So why is it seemingly more successful somewhere and kind of more moderate somewhere else?
Ola, would you like me to start?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, sure. So the situation in South Africa at the moment with Corona is quite interesting. I haven't, being based now back in Switzerland, I haven't heard much from organizations themselves on how they're handling their work amidst a total lockdown. So if people haven't checked very local news in South Africa, the approach this African government has taken as of Friday morning is to completely lock down the country. So no one can, it's much like France, no one can leave their homes essentially, and very strict control of people's mobility and movement outside of their homes, except for exceptional circumstances and for emergency services and for shopping. So people have been, there's been at the civil society front, so not quite grassroots organizations, but civil society has been a bit, not skeptical, but maybe a bit alarmed of the type of control that the state and the national government has taken, and the type of control that this lockdown indicates, specifically since the army and thousands of military units have been sent out into the streets to enforce control. And these kind of doubts and fears were perhaps well-founded because over the weekend, it was leaked a memo internally that the national government is planning a kind of an urban planning response of what they call de-densifying informal townships, because the worry, of course, in terms of Corona is not necessarily city centers, but more in line with heavily densified informal settlements where the disease will likely spread very quickly, especially in areas that have high rates of tuberculosis, TB, and HIV and AIDS. So the government's response to this has been perhaps that if the virus does get to a point where it spreads quite rapidly within townships, that you're going to have effectively mass forced removals and evictions in order to de-densify the space, which brings an interesting kind of like tension that's related to this topic, in that the issue of densification in townships has long been a topic of, or kind of an area of concern for NGOs like BPU and DAG, for instance, both of the organizations that Ola mentioned. But they've both addressed it frequently from a kind of a policy angle. So trying to hold local governments, regional governments, and national governments at account for the forms of housing that are being rolled out, and trying to find ways to have a more policy and political driven approach, to really take seriously about this aspect of de-densifying the townships and basically giving legitimate affordable housing to people. And yeah, in the midst of Corona, the government's response seems to be a technological quick fix, or a planning, let's not rather technological, but a technician planning quick fix of how do you rather move people out as quickly as possible. So kind of, yeah, putting a band-aid over a gaping wound, or papering over the cracks, if you will. So these are the sorts of tensions that are coming out in South Africa at the moment, and are quite pertinent and are kind of occupying the media space. In terms of the smart city, who knows, it seems to have taken a bit of a backseat in the media at this current time. But to get to your question though about how something like, from our perspective at least, and Ola can add on to this for sure, but how the smart city finds itself in a context like South Africa. I've just come off the back of doing more analysis on the database that Ola presented on, to try to get to grips with why first in South Africa has there been this traction in place for the digital city as a lexical device to have a presence and to have hold in South Africa for a long period, from the early 2000s through to the emergence of the smart city. And then why did the smart city pick up so rapidly and so quickly as kind of like a ubiquitous lexicon framing following that? And it's been quite interesting because there was a big push from the national governments in South Africa to frame what they called beating the digital divide. So in South Africa in the post-apartheid era, the key political mission, and kind of what's seen to be the central mission of not just the national government, but regional and local governments as well, is centered almost exclusively on service delivery, whether it be housing, water, electricity, basic essential services, if you will. And what got brought into that ambit of that discussion was digital infrastructure as well. So public Wi-Fi, broadband infrastructure, not just to the general public, but more to actually create an infrastructure backbone that starts to link municipal services together with better, improved, and faster digital infrastructure. So you have this being framed through a digital city lens, and this digital city lexicon or discourse that gets rolled out in South Africa throughout the 2000s is very driven by an infrastructure kind of led mission. But what you start to see, and what Ola mentioned in Cape Town and in Durban in particular, in these kind of early reporting periods of smart, that you start to see smart blossoming. And that kind of comes from Durban and Cape Town in particular, testing evidence-based decision-making systems, essentially within government, within local government. So how do you create these complex databases that accumulate data from disaster risk management, transport management, health, fire services, to bring this all together from past to present effectively to make better decisions going forward? And it seems that Cape Town and Durban, both in the 2004 to 2008 period, used this term smart to reframe that form of urbanism going forward, that this isn't just about digital infrastructure. This is about a city that acts smartly and is intelligence-led. And you really start to see that take traction across the country through the national government, with the national government kind of like leading this thought of smart as being something that's about monitoring and evaluation and creating internal capacities within cities that better manages performance according to kind of tracking data, as well as like discussions of reindustrialization start to emerge. And this is happening at a national level following Cape Town and Durban, which then you start to see other cities take hold after. I don't know if you take on from that, Ola.
Yeah, I think we need to hear from Jörg as well, but very shortly on your question, why, what's happening in the global south, if I just summarize your question, Milica. I think this is basically the question we're asking in our project. So most studies on the smart city have been, for the moment, on the global north. So what's happening there? And so this is why we look at it and we use the term provincialization. And what we try to do is to figure out a repertoire of provincialization, saying it's just not just something happening in another way because it's the global south, but we can look at it from different angles, from different scales. It is of course related to the political history of a country and a political situation now. India and South Africa are very different. It's much more top-down and centralized in India than in South Africa. But also, on the other hand, it's quite different in terms of the role of civil society organizations, very strong in both cases, but with different histories. And there's the legacy of the anti-apartheid movement, which is very strong in South Africa. So basically, that's the question we're trying to answer. What's happening specifically in the global south with a series of hypotheses that I can get back to later, if you like.
Yes, Jörg, would you like to tell us a little bit more? Also, I mean, you've curated that symposium, Beware of Smart People. So maybe you can also give us a little bit of your insights onto that particular topic.
Maybe I can give a little bit of, thank you, a little bit of insight in what we are actually doing right now in our collaborative research center on smart cities with Martina Löw and my team, which is running now in the second year. And we have been focusing on Korea, but I can talk about that a little bit later. I thought for me, the lecture was super inspiring. Thank you very much. And I thought of another maybe in between kind of technological fix that Malterre-Barthes, who's an architect from Kenya, reported on in our last conference in February. And I think it's also part of the Kohlhaas exhibition in New York that we can't unfortunately see. It's about this kind of payment method of M-Pesa that they use in Kenya. And I thought that was very, very impressive how a kind of simple technological device, I think you don't even need a smartphone, but can produce a kind of bottom-up generated safe payment and financing method. And she was talking very kind of eindrücklich, impressive, about how the urbanization even of rural areas would happen through business starts by like everyday people that were, because Kenya had not had a phase of industrialization, so how could they leap jump, you know, the over kind of industrialization into a digital age and kind of starting businesses, startups, and starting an urbanization from that. So I thought that was super impressive because it was maybe another field kind of opened up in between what you say is the kind of slum rehabilitation, data collection, empowerment bottom up, and kind of state strategies to kind of public-private partnerships in smart city kind of generation. What also came into my mind was Vanessa Watson's work on more on the kind of top-down, you know, smart city discourse and how the smart city imagery is used for development, how you say, developmentalism in the order to produce, you know, urban products and not even to kind of realize them, but to attract investment in the first and second phase of a project. So how this is bound to kind of investment strategies, I thought was super interesting. And taking all these examples together, like your talk, the bottom up, the top down, the in between, the whole kind of question of investment into urbanism. I think what I want to stress again, what I found very convincing in Ola's beginning of the talk is how the smart city in the end has hardly any real definition, how it is an umbrella term, you know, to enroll actors, to engage into certain, you know, either technological or urban developments. And it's super hard to come up with a kind of common denominator except for maybe that, you know, certain so TECHNOFIX should be part of the solution. So
yes.
yeah.
No, I agree. I think that there is this very nice term, the lexical glue. I think is a very good term. It becomes, I mean, you would say in French, it's like this kind of concept fourre-tout, where you just, you know, everything that is like related to technology and city making and is just kind of shoved into under the smart city. But I think that the lexical glue is a very nice way to frame that and to address this aspect. There are one and two questions that are basically of great importance to the series, and that I would like to address here. It's this question about, does technology have politics, which is something that I think in the talk of Ola very clearly is answered. There are politics of technology very clearly, but I want to bring it up again because there is currently, so to ground it again in the contemporary situation. There was an article yesterday in the NZZ, in the new Zurich Zeitung, that says that Swisscom is now delivering data to the state. So this is not, of course, out of, it's not new. I think that the state has been receiving GIS and no, how to say, GPS data and stuff like that, but now it's clearly in the frame of the crisis. Of course, this is not one-to-one related to urbanism of smart cities, but I think it gives a good example of how, let's say, there's a certain authoritarian aspect to technologies that we can see uncovering in I think the example of India is brilliant. I mean, this kind of research of these guys sitting in front of their monitor and the system sending automatically fines to the drivers who've been like dumping trash is something that in Switzerland doesn't need to happen, because the citizens would be happy to call the police themselves and how you say, denunciate the people who do that. So here you have a kind of civil society that palliates that. However, the technological data is then used by the Bund for other things. It's not clear yet. That article, I can share it with you in the chat, is actually not, it's in German, but it's also not really specifying what is going to happen, if you want to see. So I was just curious, maybe to go back to Daniella briefly, because I know
this, are you implying a kind of a South Korea tracking, which Ola also mentioned in his talk?
I just want to put it out there because I think it's very it's very interesting how these things that we thought were not really happening, that there is a kind of trust into institution, especially in countries like here, where there is this kind of idea that the state, because of its federalism, is not inclined to such a let's say a derive. I don't know how you would frame it. Well, I mean, this is now happening. So I'm just, I'm not giving an answer because I have my own opinions, of course, but I think it's really important to address these things given the topic, let's say. So I'm just asking Daniela because, I mean, this is a question for everyone, of course, but I know that Daniela has been extensively working on Swiss cases, and maybe she has a particular insight on that. I'm sharing the link now on the chat.
Thank you. The déjà vu I had is more when I read the newspapers, were the articles on faxes that did not work, and somebody was weighing the paper when sending the notifications of Corona. So that is a very stable discourse too. In terms of in times of crisis or in regular times too that the control does not work. So I think control and crisis, they are like pairs that belong together. And yes, when I listened to Ola's talk, I found it very interesting when you said that this is what you find as results of your analysis. You find those reiterations of the same discourses over and over again. And this is what we find too in our historical research projects. We have controlled discourses that reach back to the 50s, and they are revived every 10 years or something like that. So this is the first thing we find, and what is very hard to find then is, or to answer, how does innovation work? How do those old discourses challenge other concepts or other actors? And I think this might work as as a lens to focus on now too. Who would be in charge and who is affected if we have those old discourses working again? And I think Ola here is right too, that we don't have to look at the real existing smart cities or the really existing infrastructures only. It's all about imaginaries too. It's about fictions. They work too. Yes, I think that's our work as humanists, and it's important, as you said. Yeah.
Ola, yes, would you like to?
Yes, it's always fantastic to talk to historians because they can weave those relations and links. But I would also say that, like in the Asian way, it's same but different. The history repeats itself but takes other guises. And I think I think Charlotte mentioned the Korean, and I did it in the beginning of the talk, Korean strategy. And I think it's interesting because there's not just a democratic, like would be, say, Sweden, which has been, as you know, very lax for the moment in terms of constraints, confinement. There's not just Sweden and China, like an authoritarian and a more democratic response, where Switzerland would be closer to Sweden, say. But I think there's different forms of power enacted in the present response. The Korean one is you accept your exposure as a citizen, because it has worked, because you are, as a person, related to your mobile phone, to your credit card, to your CCTV. So the CCTV, actually, I don't know how it works, if it's facial recognition or not. I don't know.
Yes.
Is it? Yes. So there you kind of release your freedom in terms of control over your data, but you are not confined in closed walls like people in Wuhan. So I think that it's interesting to see how power is exercised in different ways. And the Korean thing, I think, is very close to the smart city thing, because if something is happening which is similar in all cases we look at, it's all about data power. So it's about data power in terms of how the civil society organizations play the data game to like negotiate, promote their positions in South African case, for instance. But it's also the question of data power. I just wrote a paper on platform urbanism with a colleague who's been exploring the Airbnb effect in Reykjavik. And there, the question is, it's also about data power, but much more the kind of relations of control over data, release of data between those digital corporations, Airbnb, Uber, and the public authorities. But the big thing which has changed, of course, it's like the question of violence. There's no monopoly of of data. There's never been, but there's even less monopoly. Maybe Daniela can be much more precise here than I am. But there is this kind of change of the monopoly over large data, which is so interesting in those cases.
Daniela, do you want to follow up before maybe Jörg?
No, let's hear Jörg. Yeah, no.
No, it's I think it's super interesting at the moment because we looked at Songdo Smart City for the last 1.5 years, and we're about to leave it for the sake of LA as a new kind of smart city concept of different communes in LA to look at. But now we are kind of back with all of our researchers on site, like looking how they actually act and within the crisis and how this actually works, the tracking. Because what we found out at Songdo, even though in the literature it was the kind of the first, maybe the second realized, put into place, newly developed smart city, when we came there, we thought, you know, there's a lot of it is just happening subliminally, and a lot of people are not even aware they live in a smart city. We were more looking at the everyday actions. And then there had been a huge technological change, like all of the embedded technology and sensors that they have installed, but there was a huge change during the development to the, you know, the Internet of Things. So the iPhone became much more important than all of the devices that they had installed, and the tracking through the iPhone and the apps is much more controlling the everyday. And a lot of the installed CCTV, for example, in one housing block, there were 400 CCTV in one housing block, like kind of 4 or 5 buildings. And what we looked at like a couple of weeks ago is how, like, definitely a very open and uncontrolled and ungated urban structure or morphology finally ends up to be very tightly gated and secured environments for the middle class, both financially as well as other security reasons, by the support of all these kind of control techniques. Now what happens now, most of the people hardly know, it's very subliminal, they don't even use all of the technology that they're offered, and they try to live their everyday life in a long history of modern or digital or future cities that South Korea has. They started in the 80s to develop imageries like comics of digital cities. Even the big companies cooperating with the government, they had these, you know, fairy tales or stories all laid out. So it's just something that came true, that people were expecting. Now in the crisis, we do interviews with control rooms, and it was amazing how in the first days they can literally track somebody, you know, where he had dinner, whom he met, whom he joined to a private clinic, where he then went for a walk. There's a whole path of, you know, 24 hours spatially laid out. And it's only starting now in the last 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days that it seems to be more critically discussed if you can really connect all the private, you know, compound CCTV data with the public CCTV data, with the phone data, with the credit card bill data. And I think they're starting to reflect on it more, let's say, in a democratic tradition. But what we found, and this is the main research question I have now, that most of the public and the private surveillance and data gathering infrastructure seemed not to be perfectly connected. Like even in the control rooms of a smart city, the police that was sitting there had a hard time getting on the data, which was in another space in the room where other people were looking at, and then to contact the police on the ground. Like there was a lot of, you know, kind of delay in this information when you think, wow, they're gathering data.
GPS functions to track the mobility.
Yes.
Combined with CCTV images.
Somebody's re-looping something. Can you mute? I don't know who is doing that. But
I think he's asking a question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Who is this? Wait. So is someone wanting to ask a question?
Yeah.
Please raise your hand virtually.
If I understood the question, if there was a connection between GPS data of individuals and CCTVs, and in order to, and I think this must and this is what we thought was not there, or at least it was not performed, but which has been performed during the crisis. That the connection of credit card data, of CCTVs in public space, and GPS located tracking of a cell phone. And these it was more or less like 28, 29 companies that and public institutions that seem to have cooperated very, very quickly. And there were only like bureaucratic difficulties in that it took several instances to ask for data and to open data. So it took 24 hours in the beginning to have the tracking of a person who was supposedly infected. And in the end, like after a couple of days, it only needed, or now you need 10 minutes to get a whole day or 2 or 3 day tracking of an individual. But this is just data that I got from our Korean researcher who, you know, kind of read all the reviews and contacted people and kind of translated interviews that we had. So for us, it's very surprising how a lot of things seem to be falling into place that were imagined in the smart city, but for either bureaucratic reason or institutional reasons had not been performed.
Right, I see we're already 15 minutes to our end. I'm gonna ask the participants to type their questions into the chat, and then we'll follow up on that.
Should we ask the participants also to connect with cameras so that we can see each other?
Both is possible. I would just say I think there maybe some people are more comfortable with typing the question. It's okay also. Both possible.
Yeah. So everyone who would like to see us or show their face, I mean, it would be great to see you all, although we know your names, let's say.
Okay.
We know the people behind the names.
So but just to kind of continue on this thing, because I think that so basically what is there is a kind of on the one hand there's like a hopeful, let's say hopeful for individuals, but also problematic perhaps at times of crisis, is that some of the communication between the data gathering bodies is not so smooth. So you have a kind of, I mean, I think this is something we've perhaps all experienced with I don't know, let's say if you are being getting a speed ticket in a foreign country, they might not, I mean, even within the European Union, they're not really, it's not working that well that you'll actually get the bill at home, even if your plate is kind of registered. I think this shows that there are things that are not, maybe it might work now. There are systems that don't talk to each other yet. I think especially in the European Union, there are very clear hurdles. There are just like data connections that are just not working, let's say. And I'm curious to hear a little bit about Evan's research, because we're talking about a data collection that is kind of managed by communities. I just wonder how that actually works. Is there a data delivering? Is the state still getting some of the data? I mean, I'm just curious about that as a let's say as a kind of contrasting to the other case, or to the case of Jörg, and as a kind of question on this biopolitics in the end, which are turning to biopolitics technological tools in a way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, so in the case of most municipalities, so your very local government, data collection on the city itself is primarily done through, or at least day-to-day is primarily done through GIS and remote sensing. So if you're dealing with urban expansion, it's typically pulling up satellite imagery and mapping expansion of households house by house. So very rarely do you have municipal officials actually going to the ground and collecting data from the grassroots up. Which has created a space for organizations like BPEU, which position themselves in this kind of this murky middle between operating between government and community, but not quite putting themselves as community advocates, rather operating as like a neutral arbiter between both parties, allows a BPEU to position themselves and go to government and say, hey, you've got this GIS data for sure, but we can mobilize a community to produce more nuanced data from the ground. There's going to be a trade-off, and this is what the trade-off that we require will be, specifically around service delivery or service maintenance in a particular community. So you almost see data collection, at least with the VPU and the bigger projects that VPU work in. So bear in mind that Ola kind of positioned VPU and DAG against each other, which that does happen. But at the same time, VPU and DAG often work collaboratively together on data collection projects, such as the project that myself and one of his other PhD students is working on around basically by hand using GIS, but visibly seeing on the ground where new informal settlement housing is and mapping it. That gives leverage for these organizations like DAG and VPU to make claims to the local governments and to national governments as well. So data collection becomes a form of claim making because local government just doesn't have the resources or the capacity to do their work on the grassroots.
Thank you for this precision. I think it's really interesting. I mean, I was also curious, apparently, I mean, on another, again, to bring it back to the question of the crisis today, apparently there are also drug cartels in favelas of Brazil, which are basically self-organizing quarantine. And they're also using, you know, mobile WhatsApp groups to kind of inform people. So basically they're palliating the states, which is, as we know, in the Brazilian case, particularly problematic in response to the crisis. I mean, we have a few minutes left. I don't see any question. Please feel free to raise your hand and show your face or not.
No, come on, let's, it would be great. I appeal to the students to show their face and say a few words. It's very, very disturbing to have this.
Otherwise, we don't believe you that they're students.
You know, as a stand in for students, you know, so we definitely want to see you and have
okay, great. We have
it actually looks like tombstones.
Yes,
or like
exactly. Very threatening and very, very disturbing in this conversation about the total totalitarian control or through technology. So we definitely want to see you.
Look, everyone is showing up.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I don't know, I think I can unmute you, but I think you have to unmute yourself because all of you are now mute.
Yes.
So I can try to unmute. Can you, so for
instance, they need to unmute themselves. If they
yes,
want.
I think that's something. So maybe we can start with Kay. I see only Kay. Are you able to unmute yourself and maybe contribute with a comment or a question? I cannot unmute you. Okay, you prefer not to. That's okay. Then I see Serena. Maybe you could, would you like to make maybe a comment or have a question?
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
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 I don't really have a question, but I do have a comment, and it's that in this situation we find ourselves in everywhere in the world. I feel like now every lecture that I'm following through Zoom and in remote is talking about this situation, and it's kind of
overwhelming.
Overwhelming, yeah. So I guess it's the first couple of weeks of the situation, and at least for us in Switzerland, in Zurich. So I guess it's normal, but I really hope that it's not going to be like that throughout June, because otherwise I won't make it in my quarantine.
It's interesting because we had today a discussion in the team where we were with Milica. We were discussing the fact that, for instance, there are studios where, I mean, I was attending another studios where there was not thematized at all. So it was the opposite. It was like a studio which was kind of, let's say, suspending the crisis, right? Which was saying, so, and then there was this discussion also about how business as usual is kind of still the order of the day. So we're doing business as usual, but we're talking about the crisis nonstop.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think it's also that's what I was talking before when we started the conversation, that we said that it was about a fine balance where we just don't talk only about that. But it is a fact that the topic itself is kind of also, let's say, in a way resonating with what is happening. But I think it's a very valid comment. Milica?
I think I would like to connect, because I think it's really great point by Serena. So and we have this you know, in our title we just say kind of in a simple way, urbanism beyond techno-fix, right? And I think it's interesting to try to reflect. So what happens next, or what happens beyond, right? In a way, how even this exercise in let's say online functioning might change the kind of let's say political or power geometries, or even the kind of let's say ethos in the let's say of ethos of design, of urban design in the next months and years. And you know, what is the situation toward which we are going? So I would ask this you know, also to, I mean, to everybody involved, right? To Jörg, to Ola. I mean, how do we think in layers, in different kind of interactions? How do we use this for something which is constructive, let's say, you know?
Ola, yes.
Yeah, many interesting questions.
You raised hands, yeah.
I just wanted to, because also thinking about the students, I think some small points. Jörg mentioned this work, this use of smartphones for payment in Kenya. There's a very good paper by a geographer called Prince Guma from Kenya, who wrote about this. It is excellent. I also wanted to intervene on the question of the empty signifier. So you as students and we as scholars, you know, we have these new labels coming up all the time: sustainable cities, smart cities, and there might be a danger to say, okay, these words can be just, you know, lexical glues, and can be just, we can forget about it because they talk about so many different things. At the same time, they do things. So under the smart city label, things are changing. You know, people are using this to come up with rights claims in the informal settlements in Cape Town. Some things are done in cities, you know, like new project. So it's not because we work with fuzzy concepts and people act with fuzzy concepts that these do not have implications in the real world. And the last thing I wanted to talk about, and that ties back to Milica's question and also to what Daniella was saying, we might be tempted, and that's very much what Alan Weinberg, whom I mentioned in my talk, was doing at the time. Okay, we have social engineering, so also about all about humans, you know, fixing things and doing things, and then we have technology solutions, which is of course a dichotomy that doesn't work. And as Daniella was saying, technologies are also fixed in the sense that all kinds of technologies, and this is what we learn from people in science studies, from science technology, and so those forms of studies, that any kind of technology embeds a series of hypotheses about what people do and what they might be doing differently with the technology. So to put it as Madeleine Krisch did many years ago, every technology is a script. So the social is inscribed in the technology, so it can be changed. And the forms of things we're working now, there are also, we use them in ways where we think, okay, this is how we can teach, this is how we can interact, and we try to shape them as technologies to work as tools which are flexible. And I think this is very interesting in how can we work with this in the future. And I invite you to read a very nice intervention by Bruno Latour in AOC, which is a French online newspaper, where he's asking the question, what do we want to not restart after the crisis? How can we use the crisis not to restart urban design as it was done before, research as it was done before, teaching as it was done before, energy as we used to do it before? How can we avoid restarting and getting back to business as usual?
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe Jörg, you see there is also a question. I don't know if you want to react to that as well.
Maybe very two brief reactions. No, Ola, you're totally right. I think a fuzzy concept or an umbrella term can be extremely powerful, exactly because it enrolls. And I think maybe you as a scientist, I'm maybe not that familiar, but me as an architect and urban designer, when I shifted to urban research, I realized it's mostly fuzzy concept that makes things going, maybe different to architecture. The whole urban development is about unclear figures, unclear terms, incomprehensible dimensions, and the most productive actually, dealing with fuzziness. So I think you're totally right, and I think it's something that should be close to somebody who's studying and kind of doing urban design and urban research. And I think I just want to have a final word to the question of the student, to Serena, because I think she's totally right. That's something we have to negotiate constantly now for mental health. Not everything should be about Corona that you're actually dealing with. But then at the same time, I have no idea about any topic in architecture or urban design, be it housing, museums, shopping, development, can be taught, not taking into considerations like the huge transformations that we will be probably facing, which are very fuzzy and we don't know what's happening. So that's the kind of spagat that we have to kind of deal with as teachers. But thank you for the comment.
Right. The question is, how could we achieve a bilateral surveillance so that the state can also be held accountable for how it manages a crisis, and not only the citizens who behave against the law? How can we avoid that these surveillance strategies will not be used outside of a state of emergency? That's a written question. Maybe Daniella and then Ola, you could, or no, I mean, maybe that's for Ola then, if Daniela, you're uncomfortable. No,
Yes,
unmuting.
I was looking for the button, how to come back again. Yes, I think this is a very good question. I'm thinking about it since the borders were closed, and I feel much more affected as a citizen by the closure of the borders. I'm shocked on how the European Union's state looks like, and I hope that borders can't be closed so easily later. So, and I'm not so shocked by the lockdown, by having rules how to behave in a supermarket. So maybe this is a question that is interesting for urbanists and people who think a lot about territories too, to like remap our movements. Where do we live, and what is a state? This is a very academic answer, I think. And the political answer is I would join in, and I want to have my rights written down better in the yeah, I don't want to be locked in so easily again into a country. Yeah, that's an experience I made. Thank you.
Ola, would you like to answer? Yeah, and I think we are actually we can use that also as kind of the closing. Maybe we can have a quick round, but we're already at the end.
I think that's an excellent question, and the question shows that you as students have a lot of critical vigilance. because this is exactly what, people in the social sciences, but also hopefully elsewhere, that's their job, to look historically at these things. And you're very right to say implicitly in your question that things that arise in states of exception, in moments of exception, very often are very sticky. They remain in place and then they become the normality. But if we want to hold, as you say, accountable the state for this, we need to be able to tell that story and to say what is changing and how we would like to avoid that some things that are there for good reason and for a temporary moment will stay there forever.
Right. I think the French state is particularly problematic in this regard. I mean, every state of emergency has been actually written into the constitution. So to the point where, no, it's true. After the riots in France, in the banlieue, basically the state of emergency is just now constitutionalized, and you have very few. I think the only thing that has not been written, it's also after the terror attack, of course, in Paris, is the fact that you don't have a curfew. So when the French state actually makes the state of emergency, it can go into people's home and so on and so forth. That's already in the constitution. The only thing is the curfew. Then it imposes a curfew. That's what the state of emergency in France would look like. So I think this question is very valid. And
if you want to read something more about this, in yesterday's, I think it was yesterday, no, Saturday's Le Monde, if you read French, there's an article by Giorgio Agamben, the philosopher who's like the philosopher of the state of exception, and he intervenes about that and saying exactly more or less what you're saying.
All right. I think with this we can perhaps conclude. Milica, would you like to maybe?
I mean, I like this Ola's quotation of Bruno Latour. What do we want not to restart after the crisis? I haven't read this piece yet, but I've been thinking along these lines, and I like the Daniella's answer to this question. And I also found the answer rather surprising. I mean, I think the point about borders is very good, and of course you could say, why exactly are those borders closing? We could have just as well closed the cantonal borders, or the municipal borders, or some other borders. And I think that there are a lot of latent latent energies are played out through the state of exception to test out certain possibilities, no? And then I think only when this whole process lifts up, then we will be left with something, we will really be forced into that kind of questioning, do we need this back or not? And then we will be kind of faced with the fact that we gave it up, for a while or not, and so on. And I think that this will, so I think this situation will provoke a kind of enormous questioning, which will, a lot of it will also relate to the status of technology in the daily life. And I am a little bit afraid, perhaps not afraid, but I mean, I personally would like not to enter into endless debate how wonderful the success of online teaching was and how great results we got, because I would love to interact with my students in person as much as possible, no? And I would also, I would also love to, let's say, hold on to the possibility of a kind of ethnography of direct experience in getting to know places, as urbanist, as designer, working you know, having other ways to say so, to collect our data, which is through the direct kind of sensory experience and the kind of interaction with people and places. So I'm hoping that this experience of Corona will not validate the kind of you know, the let's say increasing to say so power of online tools in managing various aspects of our life, right? Which may come as a push from various sides, right? Because I think it's very opportune probably for many people when, you know, the entire population of a country sitting, each one in an individual room, and everything seems to be functioning perfectly in an online world. And I'm just thinking about, you know, in the country where I'm from is a kind of a soft authoritarian country even now. This is Serbia, and then there is you know, there is Hungary and so on. So even at let's say borders of European Union, we have all type of political experiments going on, right? And this situation plays in the hands of a certain kind of modalities of government very well. So I am hoping that you know, that we will come out of the crisis of the Corona situation kind of you know, empowered, and I think for this reason I think we should really think about this question, you know, what do we want not to see happening afterwards, right? I think we should try to be ready.
Yes, there is this kind of prophetic book by Isabel Stengers, In Catastrophic Times, Resisting the Coming Barbarism. So I think that there are maybe a few resources. I'm gonna share this to the chat as well, which is a book that talks about climate change, but is of course about how capitalism is always about profit, and how even in a kind of a crisis situation, these kind of processes are being rewired and continued. And of course, she's referring to this coming barbarism, and I think that's actually very very salient and kind of echoes what Milica was just saying.
But we have to thank everybody.
Yes, but the time is still running. Everyone has still homes and partners and still a kind of a life, sort of a life.
And we can also, despite these kind of gloomy things we were saying at the end, we can also restart positively. Yeah?
Absolutely.
That's the whole point of thinking
Absolutely.
about how to restart it.
No, in fact, absolutely. I would just leave that out there. I'm part of the team of the German pavilion for the Venice Biennale, and the prospect is 2038, and it was envisioning a crisis and going beyond the dystopia, working on, you know, what would we do great. So it's something. It's in fact a whole work. Let's say dedicated to exactly what you said, reacting and restarting positively. So, you know, housing, food, politics, just using the crisis as something to in fact relaunch a better oh, that's gonna sound bad. A better world. That sounds really bad.
Yes.
But you get it. In any case, I also think that it's in that sense we can end on that positive note. So I would like to thank very much our participants. I would like to thank, of course, the students for joining, and those who showed their face. Also, particular thank you for that and the questions asked. And I would also like to thank very much Daniella, Jörg, and Ivan for joining the conversation and contributing in such a great way to this topic, and Ola for his great insights in his research that I think has been really interesting. The idea would be to leave that to make this conversation also available later on. So thank you very much. Milica, would you like to have the last word?
No, just to thank everyone. It was really really, let's say, special. And it was a great talk, great conversation. Great to see you all. Really
Yes.
great to see you. And I miss also seeing you in person soon.
Yes, it would have been nice. But we managed to do it like that too. So hopefully we will meet in person also. So thank you very much. And I will end the meeting here. And I wish you all a good evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Bye.
Oh, thank you so much. Ciao. Greetings to the students. Ciao.